And welcome again to Cottage Talk. I am Russ Goldman. Joining me right now is Tony Gold. This is our new episode for the new season. I'm calling it Cottage Talk, the state of Fulham on July 1st. What is the ambition of Fulham Football Club? As always, please do subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. It does help other Fulham supporters find us. We are actually live on YouTube. If you're not a subscriber, please do subscribe. If you're watching live, feel free to share a comment. But before I go on any further, it's been a long time coming. I want to welcome Tony to the show. Tony, thank you so much for joining me. You and I have been talking a lot lately, and I thought the best person to talk about what's going on with Fulham right now would be you, because I've been talking to you a lot. So thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to doing the show with you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Tony, like I said, welcome to the show. So let's get going. Let's talk about what are your ambitions for Fulham this season. I'll talk about mine. Then we'll talk about what we want Fulham's ambition to be and what we think there are.
Well, obviously, based on the last couple of seasons, this season, I think, is really an opportunity for the club to push on. I think we've had two consolidating seasons where, Silva's done really well. The fact that we lost the players that we lost at the end of last season and we managed to, still be competitive and have a reasonably good season, give or take everything that happened. But, for me, it's now about, what Fulham Football Club want to be. What do the owners want the football club to be? Where do they want us to move forward now? And to be perfectly honest with you, I think now, the Khans have got to start looking at it in terms of, we want to take this seriously now. We want to bring in players that can improve the squad. Silva's also got to be, energized to want to get better players in to push us on. So ultimately, for me, I think we have to be finishing above 13th next season if the club is serious about, wanting to be a competitive Premier League football club.
Okay, so you're looking basically to be better than last season. Am I correct on that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what's interesting about this, and I will make my prediction after I see the team that they build. But for me, Tony, I want better than that. So my ambition is I want Europe. Now, maybe that's asking too much because I expect a lot of changes here. But they've now established themselves in the Premier League for 2 seasons. They've gone from 10th to 13th, and it's understandable. But I think if they're not in the top 10 pushing for Europe, I'm not saying getting into Europe, but they need to be striving for Europe. That's my ambition. My ambition is between 7th and 8th. That's where I'm looking at. I understand where you're taking it. You're looking at, okay, let's do better than last season. We need to push on. But 2 seasons in, it's time to take more of a step, Tony. Do you understand where I'm going on there?
100%. But I think, in order for us to even contemplate achieving that, there's going to have to be big changes in terms of our squad depth and the quality of the player that we are bringing into this football club. And at the moment, I don't see that. And the players, obviously, we'll come on to that later, but the players that we're being linked with, the players that we've currently got, there's a big question mark over a couple that are staying, not staying. And all of those little pieces of the jigsaw have to fall into place in order for us to be serious contenders for European football. And I don't think we're quite there yet, Russ. And what's frustrating for me is that we, believe it or not, we are the 9th wealthiest Premier League football club. The 9th wealthiest. So we are punching well below where we probably should be in terms of, revenue, net worth, and all that kind of thing. So, that's why I just don't think at the moment the Khans are taking it that seriously. And that for me is the problem.
I'm glad that you brought that up because this is something that was brought to me. And someone asked me, well, what about the Jacksonville Jaguars? How does that affect Fulham Football Club? And my response to that, Tony, was it should not affect them at all. In fact, it should get them to invest even more into Fulham because you know what? They make a ton of money off of the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's a license to make money, the NFL, okay? So they're not losing money with the NFL. So in my mind, they should be investing even more into Fulham Football Club. Now, I know we have PSR, FFP, whatever financial situations you want to call it. They have the wherewithal. He's a multi-billionaire to invest in Fulham Football Club. And I'm hoping once the Riverside stand is finally complete and they start seeing revenue from that they invest even more. But I'm with you. They need to upgrade in several places. And we're going to be talking about that during the show, keeping key players, but also upgrades. I think that to me will tell the tale, Tony. So let's talk about, what do you think is the ambition of the owners? What do you think is the ambition of Fulham Football Club? I don't know if they have the ambition that I have. I think they're closer to you, Tony. That to me is what bothers me. I think that they are trying to take baby steps, which I kind of understand because other clubs have done that. Brighton and Hove Albion have done that. But we're talking about a tremendously wealthy owner that can invest in this club. I want to take a bigger step. I want to back this manager. If you continue to just take little steps, I think you have the opportunity to lose the manager that is really the key to everything that you do. So for me, the ambition of Fulham Football Club is closer to you than it is to me.
I think the only person that can answer that question truly is Shahid Khan. You know, where does he see Fulham Football Club as one of his commodities in all the businesses and all the franchises, whatever he runs? Where does he see that on his list? And at the moment, given the last, certainly the last few years and then years before that, and I've said it before, I think Fulham Football Club is a plaything. I think it gives them a bit of, substance in terms of, I've got this here based in London. It's a great spot, and that's what I think it is for them. And then, they'll keep it running and they'll keep it ticking over. But up until that point, at the moment, I haven't seen any more ambition than that because we haven't seen it. We haven't seen it.
And that's what bothers me, Tony. I also want to throw this out. If you're watching live, feel free to share. What is your ambition for Fulham Football Club? Are you closer to Tony or are you closer to me? Or do you feel that Fulham just need to basically stay in the league? Because I actually put out a poll yesterday asking that question because I'm curious where supporters feel on this. And when we talk about, move on to talk about Paulinho, and you talk about big club and small club, we talk about how Bayern view Fulham, it annoys me because, Tony, I know that within the realm of the Premier League, Fulham are a small fish, right? We're not a big fish. But I'll keep going back to the ownership. The ownership are not a small fish, Tony. So stop treating it like we are this small club. We are a smaller club than the Big Six, absolutely. But you have the financial ability to invest in this club. And that's why I'm curious what their ambition is. Is it just, as you said, Tony, just place to put on his portfolio, or is he looking to grow Fulham Football Club? That's where I am on that. Your thoughts?
Well, look, I think the whole Paulinho situation has been a PR disaster from day dot. When last January he was in Munich and what happened, and then what unfolded. For me, as I said, if you are genuinely want to become a club that wants to push on and become a European competitor, you cannot afford to lose the likes of Paulinho, Mitrovic, etc., because those are the players that have got you where you are. What you need is to keep those players and then add to them to take you to the next level, which is exactly what a team like Aston Villa have done, right? Aston Villa have done exactly the same thing. Newcastle are doing it now because they've got that wealthy investment and now they can bring in, and they've shown that they can do it. So those clubs have shown their ambition. I haven't seen that yet at Fulham. I haven't seen us going after what I would call, top class players that are going to be able to push you on to the next level. We don't seem to be getting there. Now, is that down to recruitment? Yes, I think it is. Where are our scouts? What players are they looking at? Where are they going to bring in these players? And also a lot of it, Russ, comes down to, salaries. A lot of these players want ridiculous salaries. Fulham, we know, are not going to pay stupid money to bring in players. So you're caught between the devil and the deep blue sea.
I hear you, my friend. I'm going to share some more comments. This is from my friend Chris Goodwin. Just so you know, Tony, Chris is a Liverpool supporter, but he is also a Patriots fan, so he likes to comment about Fulham. So says, I have a feeling the Khan's ambitions are not the same as Russ's. I would totally agree with that. I think that they are probably closer to what Tony is talking about. Now, this is an interesting one. This is from our friend Gary Cooper. If you have the wrestling aspect of it as well with Tony Khan, I think you need complete focus. In my opinion, he doesn't have that. Okay, let's get to it, my friend. Tony, I totally agree with Gary's assessment on here. I want someone that is fully committed to Fulham Football Club. I've talked about this at length on Cottage Talk. I think you're going to agree with this. What are your thoughts about that comment?
Look, any Fulham fan worth their salt, Russ, knows that Tony Khan is not the fit for this football club in that position. It's been proved time and time again. And that's probably one of the fundamental struggles and issues that we have at this football club at the moment, is not having, the right face, the right person that can fill that gap between the players, the hierarchy, and bringing in, those top quality players that we need. Tony Khan is not the answer. We know that. We've seen it. We know it. And, unfortunately, that isn't going to change because he's the owner's son. And the owner's son has entrusted him to do that, to run that position. And, and it's not just Tony Khan. To be fair, I think it's gone a bit stale at that level, Russ. McIntosh, it's all become very stale. And I think that actually, there is time to start looking at maybe that structure needs to change at some point.
I'm going to totally agree with that. But here's the thing. When it comes to Tony, first of all, he's the owner's son. He isn't going anywhere, regardless of what I think, what you think. I think we just have to accept that. But I think it's fair for us to comment on it. And I will say one thing about Tony. He gets a lot of stick, and he deserves a lot of it. But he has done some good things as well.
Oh, yeah.
Going to be balanced on that. He's done some good things. So we can't just go after him without talking about the good things. So there is a balance there. But I wish he was able to just concentrate strictly on Fulham instead of dealing with the Jaguars and wrestling. But he has different interests. That's why I've always wanted someone just to be focused on Fulham Football Club. And I think we're in total agreement on that. But for me, when I look at the whole thing, I just look at such an opportunity for Fulham to take it to the next level. And I'm glad that you brought up Aston Villa. I think that's a great example. Why can't Fulham be acting more like Aston Villa? I know Aston Villa is a bigger club than Fulham, let's be honest here too, but they have a very rich owner. They can do it. They can figure a way to bring in more revenue. I think they're trying to do that with the Riverside Stand, but I think that they're acting the right way, and Fulham, I don't think, are acting like they want to be at the top of the Premier League, and I think that has to be the way that you look at this. Or why do you own the club, Tony? I remember, and I talked about this several times, I watched an interview with Shahid Khan after Fulham came up in 2018, and he said he wanted to compete against the big clubs. Well, there's one thing about maybe beating Manchester United at Old Trafford, and there's another thing about actually being in the top six. I want to see them have that kind of ambition, and people think I'm crazy for wanting that for Fulham. I don't think I am. That's what I want. Is it realistic? Maybe if the financial situations change within the Premier League, it could be. I'm not saying it is, but right now it's not. But I want them to have that ambition, Tony. I think as a supporter, I want them to be thinking big. I don't want them to be thinking that they just want to survive. I want them to thrive, Tony.
Yeah, I don't think there's any Fulham fan that doesn't want that. I think that in order for that to happen, a lot of pieces have to fall into place. And at the moment, I don't think that we are there. I don't think we're anywhere close to that at the moment. And
I would agree.
And so, I see at the moment the way things stand. Obviously, we've lost Boa Morte; he's gone. So Silva's going to be working with a new assistant, Santos coming in. I know that they've worked previously together at Estoril for a few years.
Yeah.
So they know each other well, but he's going to come in with different ideas. He's going to come in with different thought processes. The players then have to get used to him. He has to get used to the players. Then you're looking at, is Silva going to continue to carry on playing the same way? you'd like to think so. You know, you don't see there's going to be any major changes about how we set up and how we line up. There are just so many things that need to fall into place. And as you saw last season, Russ, you know, the inconsistency, and I think that was our downfall really towards the end, is that our inconsistency in games last season was so frustrating, frustrating.
I totally agree, Tony. Totally agree. I want to share this comment from Chris Goodwin. And like I said, Chris is a Liverpool supporter, and I'll try to explain it to Chris. Do you think Fulham need to move to a bigger stadium if you want to become as big as Aston Villa or Newcastle United? And I can tell you this is a non-starter, and Tony, you'll agree with me. They're going to be at Craven Cottage. They should be at Craven Cottage for generations to come. That isn't going to change. All that they can do is maximize Craven Cottage as much as possible. Like I said, the Riverside stand will help. I would even look if they have the demand to maybe expanding a little bit more within Craven Cottage, but they're never going to build a new stadium because of the history of Craven Cottage and what it means to the Fulham supporters. So that's a non-starter, Chris, and Tony, you'll agree with me on that.
Yeah, no, it's an absolute non-starter. You know, it's Craven Cottage is Craven Cottage. Fulham aren't going anywhere. Listen, they might extend some of the stands. I think Johnny Haynes maybe eventually. I don't know if there's issues around whether that can be done or not. But look, at the end of the day, I don't think we'd have the fan base, you know, to fill a 60,000 stadium anyway, is the honest truth. Right. So, look, ultimately, everyone knows on a good night at Fulham, the atmosphere in there is incredible. You know, when everyone's on it and it's buzzing, it's a great place to be. So, yeah, I don't think the size of the stadium or moving is going to make any difference to us becoming a top 6 team. Ultimately, it's what you put on the pitch. It's the players that are representing you, that are wearing the shirt, that have to do the business on the pitch. And that's where, you know, in my opinion, our recruitment needs to be a lot better.
Totally agree. I'm with you on that, my friend. I'm going to share this from Ralph Leach, getting to talk about Tony a little, because TK ambition is to not be in bottom 6. I don't know. I would say maybe it's a little bit better than that, but I understand where Ralph is coming from. This is from another fan here as a non-Fulham fan, I'm looking at you guys finishing in the top 10 as a good season. Question, will you keep hold of Robinson, Paulinho, Muniz, etc.? Well, we can get to that during the show. We're going to talk a lot about Paulinho coming up, but it's a good point. We have to keep our key players. Tony, you've already said that. For Fulham to kick on, you need to build on what you currently have. Now, we're going to talk about Willian. We'll talk about BDR coming up as well, because they are now free agents. They can find a new team, and we have threats of Fulham players leaving. So let's not waste any time. Let's get to what I am calling the Gold Dust Twins checklist, since Tony and I are the Gold Dust Twins. So let's start with talking about, yes, it's time to talk about João Paulinho. So there's been a lot of talk about this, even talk today. It's going to continue to talk until something gets resolved, Tony. So I'm asking you the question. Should Fulham hold out for $60 million for João Paulinho? Before you give me the answer, I want to just share this with everyone that I'm not sure people are aware of. Reportedly, and I was told this, that Sporting Lisbon have a 20% sell-on to Paulinho. So keep that in mind. If that is true, and I've been told reportedly that is true, then they're not getting $60 million. They would get 20% less than that. So keep that in mind. So, Tony, share your thoughts. Should Fulham hold out for $60 million? I'll answer that as well.
Okay, so it's a good question. Yes, of course they should hold out for as much money as they can get. When you look at the player that they're getting, forget about his age, okay, for a minute, because everyone will talk about, oh, he's 29, going on 30, whatever. At the end of the day, the job that he does, Russ, there are very few players in world football that can do.
He's a unicorn. He's a unicorn.
What he can do, right? The difference that he will make to Bayern Munich's team could be absolutely monumental in terms of, you know, them pushing on and becoming the side that they want to become, in terms of, you know, becoming Champions League winners. And he could be that missing jigsaw puzzle that they have. At the end of the day, it matters not what you or I think in terms of how much they get. The club will hold out for as long as they can, because ultimately he is contracted to the club until 2028, right? So ultimately, Fulham don't have to do anything. But then what you're going to have is a situation where he's going to become really disgruntled, doesn't want to play, and then you've got a really, disastrous situation on all levels. I think we agree Polinia is unlikely to be here at the start of this, of next season. I think we can all agree with that. I wouldn't take anything less than 60 million, but I think we're probably looking at around 50, 55 million, give or take, which will ultimately be where it will finish.
Okay. So let's keep this in mind, what you think that it'll end up at, because according to what I've been reading coming from Germany, their bids, they're done with their bids. And I think it's either 38 to 39 million pounds it comes out to right now, which I think is way too low, Tony. So I want to ask this question to you, because first of all, I think Fulham should hold out for the 60 million because of the sell on. I, like you, unfortunately, I have a feeling that eventually he will go. But if he does go, and I'm fine with him going if Fulham get as much money possible and they invest it correctly, I'll also say I want Fulham to do what they did last season, meaning they need to find a replacement first before they allow this. Now, that might drag things on, but they need to find a replacement before they sell him. They got to have something lined up. I don't want another Mitrovic situation on our hands, Tony, because that's what could happen if you just say, we'll take the money. You have to have a replacement. That is my only thoughts. So for me, I think they have to get 60 million. That's where I'm going on that. But now let's talk about Bayern Munich. So they've had 3 what I consider low bids. So do you think Bayern Munich are showing a lack of respect for their low bids for João Polinia? I think they are. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, obviously they're playing a game, Russell. They're playing a game. Bayern Munich are playing a game. They're trying to unsettle the club, unsettle the player. Look, we don't know what goes on behind closed doors in terms of the conversations, but we all know that Polinia's brother is driving a lot of this. In terms of being his agent and stuff like that. And Polinia has himself said he's ready to go. He wants to go. He wants to be playing Champions League football next season. I couldn't care less what Bayern Munich do or don't do in terms of their respect or lack of respect. At the end of the day, that's the player. We know what he can do. We know what he's done, right? And you are paying premium dollar for a top player in his position. If you want him that badly, pay what he's worth, or you're going to have a situation where, Fulham will keep him. He's going to be unhappy, and Bayern Munich will just, go off into the distance and sign, another player for whatever they decide to find or whatever. But yeah, it's not a great situation. We all want to move on from this, And right. I think ultimately Polinia has made it clear he doesn't want to be at Fulham next season. He's made it clear.
Well, we're going to talk about that next, but getting back to talking about this, what irritates me as a Fulham supporter is the bid they made last season. We'll talk about the Bayern Munich supporters just arguing, well, he's a year older, but he also signed a new contract, and that is leverage for the amount of money that Fulham want here. So if you want to say they equalize themselves off, I think that they do. A year older, but he signed a new contract. So Fulham should be demanding, if potentially the same or even more than they did last season. So to go all the way down to 38 million pounds is just, I think, a slap in the face. I understand why they're doing it, because they are used to getting it. So they feel that they can do this, but we'll see how this all plays out. So now let's talk about João Polinia's thoughts. And I agree with you, Tony. João Polinia wants to move to Bayern Munich. I saw a quote, so I'm just sharing it right now. João Polinia stated, both clubs know where I want to be next month. So here's a question. Should Fulham put the needs of Polinia ahead of what is best for the club? Meaning, should they just give in to these demands? I don't think that they should. I think they need to get as much money as they can. But as you said, Tony, it's a delicate situation, because it might get to the point where he really gets upset and doesn't give you the effort that he gave you last season. He really was a professional last season. So it's really a difficult one to call. But yes, I believe he wants to go. But here's the thing, Tony, and you've said this to me before we started the show. If he wanted to go so badly, why did he sign the new contract? He signed the new contract, Tony. Why? You can't have it both ways, Tony. He got more money from Fulham. So then what do you think is going to happen next season? Of course, they're going to demand more money for your contract to go someplace else. Of course, they're going to want more of a fee. it's a trade-off. So if he wanted so badly to leave Fulham and go to Bayern Munich, he never should have signed the contract.
Listen, we all know contracts in football mean absolutely nothing these days, right? That's the bottom line. Look,
Okay.
ultimately, yeah, Palhinha, he was given some extra money to soften the blow of him not signing, when he did, and then obviously being a professional that he is, he cracked on with it. But I think underneath it all, behind the scenes, there is probably, let's make sure it happens next season. Let's make sure it happens. Now, the only stumbling block is obviously the fee that Bayern Munich are offering and what he's worth. Every Fulham fan will say he's worth whatever they think he's worth. And Bayern Munich are going to say, what he's worth. I think anywhere between 50 and 60 million is realistic, as I said, based on the position he plays, how well he plays in that position. And the fact of the matter is that Bayern Munich haven't gone after anyone else because he is a unicorn in that position. We know what he can do.
Exactly.
Week in and week out. Funny enough, incidentally, I think Palhinha, the trouble he will have in Germany, Russ, if he does sign for Bayern Munich, is how many red cards he's going to get and how many games he's actually end up going to play. Because the way he plays, he's going to get sent off every week out there.
Totally agree. Good point. Okay. Final topic in regards to Palhinha deals with the Bayern Munich supporters, okay? Because I've been following this closely. What bothers me is what I'm going to share here. So some Bayern Munich supporters have described Fulham as a prison. What is your reaction to the thoughts of these supporters? Again, it's a minority, but I've seen the comments from these supporters. I've even seen a free Palhinha hashtag, which is really annoying, to be on belief. So what are your thoughts about all this? This is big club, small club. They feel that they deserve every player. But to call it a prison, I think, is really disgusting.
I couldn't give a monkey's what the Bayern Munich supporters think of Fulham, to be perfectly honest. At the end of the day, yeah, look, they're a club. They've had unbelievable success. They are a European giant. There's no question about that. And yeah, you're right. They probably don't like being told no. But like I said, at the end of the day, why is it every other team in the world has a world-class player, and the clubs get to talking point, they sign, they get everything sorted out. But when it comes to us, little Fulham, we can take the mickey, we'll offer them a little, and they'll accept it. No, at the end of the day, if you want him, pay up. And honestly, couldn't give a monkey's what their supporters think or don't think.
Well, I'm there with you, but you know me, I'm a sensitive kind of guy, so I see all this stuff and it bothers me. But I understand where you're coming on this. That's why I wanted you on the show. You and I are different in that way. I take it a certain way, you take it a different way. You don't care, and I wish I was more like you in regards to that, Tony. But listen, it's an interesting situation with Fulham, and one thing I want to say before we move on, Tony, while we talk about this, and it does go back to Tony and Shahid and Alistair McIntosh. For whatever we think about them, and we give them a lot of crap, they do stick to their guns when it comes to their pricing here. They do stick to it. They make it difficult. So fair credit to them. They're not just handing him to Bayern Munich. So many other clubs would have done that, Tony. So I have to give Tony, Alistair, and Shahid some credit here for that.
Yeah, but he's still a prize asset, isn't he? He's still an asset. And at the end of the day, they want to get back for their asset what they can and make a profit on him. If you can't keep him, then make a profit on him, because at the end of the day, we have developed him. He, since he's been at Fulham, believe it or not, he has improved as a player. Silva's improved him. He's become a lot more disciplined, as a player. So ultimately, of course, you're not just going to give away your prized assets. Clubs have got to earn them. So if Munich want him, that's fine. You can have him, but you need to pay what he's worth.
Totally agree. All right. Enough of talking about João. We could do a whole show on João Palhinha. Let's talk about another player you and I have had a lot of discussions about. Okay, here we go. How much of a loss is Tosin? So let's talk a little bit about this now. I was going back and forth with several Newcastle United supporters who kept telling me that Eddie Howe was going to make him a world-class player, okay? Which is, again, he is who he is at this point. Anyone that's watched him enough knows that he's basically a solid player, but has a mistake in him a game. You've seen it right in front of you. So I want Fulham to upgrade. Tosin did a job at Fulham, but they need to do better than Tosin. That's the way I look at it. So is it a loss in the short term? But it's also an opportunity to get better, Tony. That's how I look at the Tosin situation.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. Look, Tosin is Tosin, right? He's a good Premier League centre half, like every defender. He's got, every defender has mistakes in them. The better defenders, obviously, they make less mistakes than others, and it's about that consistency. For me, and I'll always go back to why do these top clubs like Man City and Man U and Arsenal and Chelsea, why do they let certain players go? There's a reason why Manchester City let Tosin go. They took him as far as they could take him in his development. And the reason Tosin ended up at Fulham and had, spells at Blackburn and West Brom, wherever he was, is because he has a mistake in him. He's too lethargic. He's too casual. Right. And he's just not at that level of brilliance that you need him to be. So how he's ended up at Chelsea is anyone's guess. I mean, honestly, I cannot understand, other than the fact that he went on a free and they haven't paid anything for him other than what they're going to pay in his salary. But they'll find out soon enough. And the best way to describe him is he plays the game like he's a Rolls Royce, but he's got a Skoda engine, Russ. That's the best way I can describe it.
I've said to many people that he reminds me a little bit of Philip Senderos. And if anyone that remembers Senderos, he had a mistake in him in a game that would kill you. And I'm telling you, Tosin has that as well. I just sharing these comments from Gary Cooper here, or a couple. He says he's no great loss. He's prone to a few mistakes, and he's pretty slow. And then Gary says, let's see, what else does Gary say? Looking forward to him playing at Chelsea. See, it's Chelsea's problem right now. So that, to me, I'm actually, in a way, people are upset that he went to Chelsea. Tony, I think that's an advantage for Fulham that he went to Chelsea.
Yeah, but what does that say about him as a person? And
absolutely.
He knows the rivalry between clubs. And look, there's been plenty of Fulham players that have gone to Chelsea and Chelsea players that come to Fulham. Whatever. Look, good luck to him. It's a step up for him. It's a step up in a direction to a club that's been very successful. But are they looking at him as a replacement for Thiago Silva? There's going to be a lot of Chelsea fans that could be very disappointed.
And it's going to make me very happy, Tony. I'm going to tell you right now, his first mistake, I'm just going to laugh my ass off. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm glad that you brought this up. It talks about the person himself, that he would make the move from Fulham to Chelsea, knowing the history there. So that just tells you all you need to know. And I have no ill will against the player, but I'm thinking about, why would you do that, knowing how Fulham supporters and how Fulham in general feel about Chelsea? Why would you do that? And that tells you what you need to know about Tosin Adarabioyo. Okay, let's move on. Down our checklist, our Goldust Twins checklist, let's talk about two players that are now available to other clubs. How much of a loss would Willian and BDR be? You could take them separately or talk about them together. What are your thoughts about both of these players that are now available to other clubs?
Yeah, look, I love both of them for very different reasons. I'll start with Willian, obviously. Look, he's had a couple of phenomenal seasons for Fulham. We've got to be honest, given his age, but he's a world-class player, Russ, and ultimately, I think that for me, he will be less of a loss because, we saw it towards the end of the last season. His legs were starting to go. He wasn't starting to impact matches as much as he was. But, on the flip side of that, he brings great experience. He's technically very solid. So there's a lot of pros and cons to him. But I think ultimately, there are now younger, better, hungrier players out there that we could replace him with, to be honest.
Okay.
Bobby Decordova-Reid is a difficult one because, I love him. I think he's been a great servant to the club. He's had some fantastic games for us over the years. He's been very committed, always reliable. But I think if we strip it back and if we're really honest and truthful, he's a top-level championship player, in my opinion. And I just don't, and he's a good player to bring off the bench for half an hour, 20 minutes. Yeah, great. But we've got to be looking now at improving and better than that if we're looking to push on.
See, I'm kind of with you on both. I will take them both on. I'll first start about Willian. So for me, I think Willian has been great at times, but like you have mentioned, he does show his age. So you're kind of getting maybe 50-50 out of him. So I think it's time to move on from Willian. And as we're talking about upgrades, here's an opportunity to upgrade at the position. It's also an opportunity for younger players to get a shot. We'll be talking about some younger players coming up in a little bit. So for me, even though I saw and see the value of Willian, I think it makes sense for Fulham to move on from him. Bobby Decordova is a little bit different. Like you had mentioned, I see him a little bit like Chris Bairdinho, where he could play several positions and really help you and be a player to come off the bench. But it keeps coming back to what you just said, Tony. This is where you and I are in full agreement. At some point, you have to do better. And I think you need to move on from players like Bobby Decordova and give maybe a young player a chance, or find a young player with potential from the outside that you're bringing in to do what Bobby Decordova can do. Now, like a Tim Ream, he's been a great servant to Fulham Football Club, but at some point you need to cut bait to progress as a football club. And these two players, that's why I put them together. I think it's an opportunity. Instead of looking at what they've lost, it's what Fulham could potentially gain, Tony, because they should take the opportunity of not having these players and think about, well, how do we get better without these players, Tony? That's where I'm going on. How do we get better?
Well, you look, the way that Silva sets up and the way that, he plays with the wide men, they're very important positions in our system. And you need players that can, to get at players and deliver the balls that you need to get into the box to be effective. And you've seen it with England in the last 3 or 4 games. It's something that we haven't been great at, and you're looking at top elite players at that level. So ultimately, we definitely need to bring in, if we are going to replace them, and they are going to go. And as I said, maybe now is the right time to do that, because everything's about transition. And now might be the right time to do it. We're coming on to signing players and stuff like that. There's been a lot of talk about Dewsbury Hall. Now, I know that Chelsea is sniffing around him and they're very active, and it looks like that deal could be going for. No, that's a player that we should be going after. That is a player that we should be going after and be doing everything possible to get him into the football club. And again, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes and all the other bits and pieces, but that's just a prime example of a young player that's had a great season at Leicester. Why are we not going in for these sorts of players?
Okay, very good. I'm there with you, and we're going to talk about young players coming up in just a bit. But coming up next, I'm going to ask Tony about a player that him and I have talked a lot about, just our discussions, and I think he's going to enjoy talking about this player. Okay, Tony, we're back. So let's talk about it. Let's get to it. You and I have had a lot of conversations. There is just a back and forth about Andres Pereira. Okay, now there's speculation that potentially he could move on this summer. So I'm going to ask the question, do you want Fulham to sell Andres Pereira?
For the right price, I'm happy to see the back of him, Russ, is the honest truth. Now, listen, there's going to be a lot of Fulham fans out there that think I'm off my nut. And that's fine. Look, Pereira's like Marmite, Russell, right? You either love him or you hate him.
Yep.
Personally, from my perspective, and it's just my opinion, for the position, and I've said it all season, for the position that he plays, I don't think he's as effective as he should be and needs to be. This is a guy that's played 37 games for us this season and scored 3 goals. 3 goals from an attacking midfield position, right? He's on set pieces and free kicks. Can you tell me the last free kick he scored? Can you remember it?
I can't.
I can't. So he's had 70 games for Fulham. He scored 7 goals. There's no doubting that he's a technical, he's very good technically. He's comfortable on the ball. He brings players in. He's got a good range, good vision. There's no doubt in that. But he doesn't do enough in that position for me. And then ultimately, I'll go back to it again. There's a reason why Manchester United let him go. There's a reason. And those statistics tell you the reason why. He doesn't score enough goals in the position that he plays. And that, for me, is a big problem for Fulham. Big problem.
Okay. Interesting, because I I've talked to you a lot about this, and I'm not against them upgrading at that position. I am totally fine, like you mentioned, if they get the price that they want. But the argument for Pereira, and I've actually had someone say this to me, if you look at the stats besides goals scored, he's high in all these stats. So my argument would be, well, what do your eyes tell you? Because my eyes tell me that the stats don't really tell you the entire picture when it comes to Pereira. Like you said, the lack of goals. But he does offer what Marco wants. He wants someone that can press really well. But who's to say someone else can't do that at that position too, Tony? So are we just okay with him because Marco appreciates what Pereira does? But if you look at his overall output, he should be doing a lot more. I'm there with you. But I kind of see the other argument, like you said, the Marmite, the other side of it, because there's an argument that fans really appreciate Pereira. I'm with you on the other side. I want to upgrade it, that position. I think Fulham can do better.
Look, stats don't win football matches. At the end of the day, statistics don't win football matches. The players on the pitch win football matches. For me, look, he's been okay, Russ. He hasn't set the world alight. He's done okay. But there's been some games this season where he's been completely and utterly gone missing. You haven't seen him. He hasn't affected the game. And I'm talking about the games where you got to roll up your sleeves, the Burnley games, the Bournemouth games. It's all well and good doing it against the good sides and everything else, but it's that consistency. And as I said, you tell me how many attacking midfield players, they should be scoring 5, 8, maybe even 10 goals a season, chipping in with at least that amount of goals. For me, the goal return is not good enough. And also for the level, the role he gets a lot of freedom in there, a lot of freedom. And also on set pieces, he doesn't deliver, just doesn't. So for me, I think there are better players in that area out there.
Okay. And I just shared a couple of comments. One from Steve Reynolds says Andres' price has gone up due to Brazil sell and invest. I'm there with you, Steve. I agree with you on that. And Gary Cooper says he goes missing in lots of games. That's your point, Tony. Yep. So I understand that. This is from our friend Chris Goodwin, who, again, a Liverpool supporter, just asking a question. Does Pereira need better players around him? What are your thoughts about that, Tony?
Yeah, listen, that's a good point. You don't get into the Brazilian team if you're a mug, right? So he's obviously caught the eye. He's obviously doing something right in the eyes of the management, an international level. And also Silva does put a lot of faith in him. So, yeah, listen, I haven't seen much of Brazil recently, so I couldn't tell you that question, but he's obviously going to be playing with better players in Brazil than he is at Fulham, and maybe. But at Manchester United, he was around better players, but he wasn't given the opportunity. So why was that? Why were United happy to let him go?
See, that has been something you and I have talked about a great deal. Fulham get all these bigger clubs, they're extras, as I would say. They're players that they don't see full value on, and they sell them on. They're just not good enough for them, so they get rid of them, and then a team like Fulham will take them on. But there's a reason why they got rid of them, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. Ralph, just so you know, we'll be talking about this coming up in a little bit, okay? Because we're going to be talking about silly season standings. That's how we're going to end the show. We're going to talk about some players with some speculation on them, and Fabio's actually one of them. But let's move on. Let's talk about Marco. Now, there's speculation today that this Saudi Arabian team could be interested in as a manager. I'm not buying it because I think that he would have gone last season with that deal with Saudi Arabia. But here's an interesting thought, and I'm going to share my thoughts, and I want to get yours. Why do you think Manchester United wanted to talk to Marco Silva? Reportedly, he had this discussion, and I told you off air that I don't know how interested Manchester United were in Marco Silva. I think, in my opinion, this is my theory, that they wanted to learn about Ten Hag through Marco Silva. That's why I think they bring in some of these managers to get their thoughts on Ten Hag and then make a decision on Ten Hag. That's why I think they were talking to Marco Silva. That's just my theory on that. I don't think they brought him in to talk about becoming the next manager of Manchester United. What are your thoughts on that, Tony?
I honestly don't. I can't see why Manchester United would even be, entertain the idea, to be honest with you. The club's far too big for someone like Silva anyway. Listen, maybe it's paper talk just to maybe upset the apple cart again. Who knows, Russ? No one knows. But look, ultimately, as far as Silva's concerned, for the longevity of Fulham, I've always learned, always be aware of the unexpected, because you never know what could happen and you never know what's around the corner. And look, until the season starts, Silva could wake up one morning, Fulham could get an offer from a ridiculous offer from one of these Saudi clubs, and he could be gone. And then it's like, then everything is like up in the air and you're back to square one. So nothing ever, amazes me or surprises me in football anymore. Nothing.
I'm there with you, Tony, but I'll just say it one more time. I'm not buying the speculation with the Saudi team. They might be interested. I just can't imagine that Marco would go, but who knows? And I think you and I will be in full agreement, Tony, on this. Fulham cannot afford to lose Marco Silva, because if they lose Marco Silva, they are screwed, Tony. They built everything around him. He is the cog to everything. Everything is working because of Marco Silva. You get rid of him or he goes, you're screwed, Tony.
Yeah, well, you lose your identity and then you're back to square one. And
exactly.
That affects everything, because I'm sure he has a big say in what goes on at the academy, how the players play, how the under-21s play, etc. And that obviously feeds in with all the star. And if he go, it just becomes that unsettling situation. And we've been there before, us, haven't we? So,
yep.
We know what happens with, we know how that movie ends, and it's not normally very, it's not normally good. So that's just not an option. Hopefully, not an option.
I hope not there, Tony. All right. Let's talk about Marco a little bit more, because this is a conversation you've had and I have had a great deal. Do you want young players such as Luke de Figueroa and Devin Tanton to get a chance to play for the first team this season? I know I do, Tony, because you and I, we've had a lot of talk about Luke, and I saw him last summer in Philadelphia, and he looked so natural back there at center back, and I'm thinking, this kid's for real. I don't think he needs a loan. I want to see him with the first team. Now, that does not mean that I don't think Fulham need to get a center back or two in the transfer market. I think they need to do that. But I want him to get a chance to win Tosin's position. Why wouldn't you give him a chance? And I'm telling you, Devin Tanton is very good as well. We've got young players, Jay Stansfield, Luke Harris, or other young players. Where is the path, Tony?
Okay, this is a subject we could talk about all night, to be perfectly honest. I'm a big believer in young players, and every other football club pretty much promotes young players and gives them the opportunity. Just look at what Barcelona are doing at the moment with, they've got a 17-year-old and a 16-year-old playing. I mean, he's playing for Spain in the European Championship. Yeah, it's insane what's going on. Look, Luke de Figueroa, without 100%, should be with the first team next season. No question about it. Personally, I would chuck him in with Bassi next season and start him and get him in and give him the opportunity. Why not? Why not? One player doesn't define a team. Give him a chance. Let me tell you, he will be no worse than Diop, right? No worse than Diop. Give him a chance. Let him grow. Give him the experience. He's a good player. He's got a young, an old head on young shoulders. He's technically very strong. Give him the chance. Obviously, the thing that they're probably worried about is his size and the fact that maybe physically he might not be able to cope. And I understand that. You can't just, suddenly willy-nilly throw these young, but they've got to start somewhere. And we seem to be the only club that hesitates when it comes to these young players. Devin Tanton is another one. He's pacey. He's got great ability. Throw him in. Give him a chance. And the other one that I would like to see given an opportunity is Dibley Diaz.
Oh, yeah. Excellent.
Who's been doing phenomenal reports from him. Apparently, he's a great leader. He's also very technically gifted, which you'd expect being Brazilian. Give him a chance. Get these players in and around it. Do it. Got nothing to lose.
Why do you think that Marco has not given them the path? Now, they've trained with the first team, but when it comes to push comes to shove, they're not given the opportunity, Tony. And
I think it's the fear factor, Russ. It's the fear factor of, What's the backlash going to be from the fans? If he starts throwing these youngsters in, they start losing football games. You know what it's like when winning and losing become habits. And I think he's scared to take that chance because he's fearful of what would happen. And that, I think, is what holds him back a little bit. He doesn't have... Look, I can understand... Look, Luke Harris just isn't good enough. I think ultimately he's just not good enough for Premier League level. Just don't think he's up there. Jay Stansfield's going to be a very, very interesting one. We've spoken about Jay a lot over the season. Yep. Again, I think he's a top-level championship player. I don't think he's going to be able to do it in the Premier League week in, week out. You've seen it, you know, what needs to happen, the development, the opportunity. I just don't see it happening. I'd like to have him in and around it to give him the chance, but I don't think if you're looking at him as a long-term option, I think there's something seriously wrong.
Okay. The one thing that I would say about Jay, because I watched him a great deal at Birmingham City, and I will tell you that he's definitely at that level. The question is, can he make the step up? I think that he would actually, in my opinion, needs to put on a little weight to make that step up. I think if he did that, developed a little bit more physically, he might be able to make that. But I still want him to get the opportunity to prove one way or another if he's a Premier League player or championship player. And I think, unfortunately, like you said, the fear factor doesn't allow these players to get that chance. I hope that Jay gets the opportunity and Michael can make that judgment for himself. So, Tony, to end the show, let's end with talking about what I'm calling the silly season standing. So I want you to basically rate the players I have coming up and just your thoughts on the likelihood of them coming from just being speculation to potentially being a Fulham player. And then the question is, would you want them to be a Fulham player? So let's start with Fabio, because there is speculation with Fabio, and we've talked about him a great deal. If you're asking me, I would want Fabio back. I would totally want Fabio back. Would he be the right solution instead of Pereira? Possibly, but many would probably disagree with me on that. But as speculation goes, 1 being 1 and 10 being the highest, 1 being the low, 10 being the highest, where would you put the speculation being from 1 to 10? And also, would you want Fabio back at Fulham?
No, I don't want him back at Fulham. Okay. It's plain and simple. He's damaged goods. I think, we all know how it should have played out. It didn't. That's football. He took a gamble. He took a risk. You can understand why he did it. And hindsight is a wonderful thing. Yeah. I don't think he's the player that, number one, he was, and I don't think he'll ever be the player again that I think he could have been, unfortunately. So in terms of speculation, I'll be astounded if Silva brings him back to the club. Absolutely astounded.
Okay, I'm putting this at about a 4 or 5. I agree with you on that. I'm one that I would like him back. I understand where you're going. There are many Fulham supporters that look at former players and say, you know what, I'm done with that. Ryan Sessegnon has been training reportedly with Crystal Palace, and I wouldn't have been against Sessegnon coming back, but there are others who would say you just got to move on. I guess I understand that too. All right, here's a player that I think is in my opinion, number 1 on Fulham's wish list, Emile Smith-Rowe. I think this is a player they actually want. I buy the speculation. I put the speculation probably at a 7 or 8 because I think this is legit, but there are many teams that are interested in it. So, Tony, do you buy the speculation, and would you want him at Fulham?
I would definitely want him at Fulham Football Club. I've been very vocal about that over the last few months on Twitter. Look, Emile is a fantastic player. He had a bad injury, and you know what it's like when players have these injuries. It takes a bit of time to get back and stuff like that. And for him now, it's probably the right time for him to move on. The stumbling block for me, Russ, would be, in the player's mind, number 1, what Arsenal will value him at. Number 2, his wages. And number 3, I could see him at Fulham. He is a player that I could see at Fulham if all those other factors, could be sorted out. 100%. He's a very good player. And I think someone like Silva could really get him to the levels that he was at. I think he would be an unbelievable fit, really good fit.
Okay, I'm all for that too, but I think it's going to come down to price and if the player actually would want to come to Fulham, Tony, because I don't know if he does or if he does not. But I'm for trying to get a player of that level. I'm there with you on that. Let's talk about a player that has been just left and right for the past, 2 years? There's been speculation on Andre. So I'm going to put the speculation low at maybe a 4 or 5 just because we keep hearing about this. And honestly, the speculation I heard is that Fulham were ready to move on Andre if they sold Paulinho in January. Maybe that is true. But what are your thoughts about Andre?
Yeah, look, I think if Paulinho goes, he's obviously been a player that Fulham have been linked with, numerous times. Personally, I haven't seen him. I can't say I've seen him play. I don't know enough about him, but the reports are that he's only 22 years old. He plays in that position. He's very technically good, strong. So yeah, look, I mean, ultimately we're going to be linked, and we are linked with loads of players. Personally, as I said, he's not a player that I know too much about. So you just have to go with the scouts and hope that they're signing a decent enough player that can come and do the job.
Okay. And the speculation has been going on way too long, but I think that it's a player that they will look at, but who knows in the end if he'll ever become a Fulham player. All right, you and I have talked about this player, Eddie Nketiah. What are your thoughts about him?
Another player that I would 100% sign if we could. Him and Smith Rowe, they improve the quality of what you've got. I think he's a very, very good player. Very, very good player. And he's just unfortunate that he's playing in a very, he's part of a very good Arsenal side.
Yeah.
I think he would thrive at Fulham. But again, it's going to come down to, would the player be interested? Valuation of what Arsenal value him at. I mean, I heard something stupid like 50 million. You're not paying 50 million for Eddie Nketiah. 30 million, maybe there's a conversation to be had, even 25, but not 50. But personally, he's exactly what we need, in my opinion. He would thrive it for him, definitely.
Okay, I don't see this happening. I'm going to put it low, maybe a 4 or 5. But hey, if Fulham are up for it and he wants to come, I would not be against bringing a player of this stature, like you said, along with Smith Rowe. These are quality players. We're going to end with a player that there was speculation today, which probably got people to think, something's going on with Paulinho. But then I had someone tell me that it's not really a like for like Scott McTominay. Now, what are your thoughts about him? I've watched him play, I would say a decent amount. I'm not in love with him. I could basically take it or leave it with Scott McTominay. And I don't know if he's a direct swap for Paulinho. I don't know if that's really what he is. So what are your thoughts about this? This actually broke today. And I think I told you in the article from Give Me Sport, they don't even mention Paulinho. They actually talk about Kearney, which I find very interesting. So what are your thoughts about Scott McTominay? What do you think about the chances that he becomes a Fulham player?
I think they're very slim. I think back in January, there was snippets about whether or not Fulham were going to sign him, and they were talking about. At the time, I was thinking, nah, Scott McTominay. But actually, I've changed my opinion on him in the last sort of 6 to 7 months. I actually think he's quite an underrated player. Actually, I don't think he's a top level Man United player by any stretch, but I think actually, at Fulham, I think he would be, a slightly better, stronger version of a Kevin McDonald. That kind of sort of player that would come in there and do that sort of job. And actually, he's quite effective. So personally, I wouldn't mind.
Scores goals too, Tony, by the way.
Yeah, he's solid. He's strong. He's good at corners. He attacks the ball well. So I wouldn't be. I mean, if that's on the cards, I would certainly change my mind and say, yeah, listen, if we can get him, go for it.
Okay, great. Tony, the hour has flown by. We've gone an hour. And before we go any further, I just want to thank you for doing this with me. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Yeah, it really has been. And I want to appreciate, or say I appreciate all the Fulham supporters that were joining us live. Before we sign off here, I have 182 people watching live with us. So that just tells you a lot of how Fulham supporters want information on Fulham and talk on Fulham, and I'm going to continue to give it to you. But before we wrap up, I just want to say, please do subscribe on YouTube. It does help other Fulham supporters find us. We really want to build up the Cottage Talk YouTube channel, so please do subscribe if you haven't already. Well, Tony, it's time to wrap this up. For Tony Gold, I'm Russ Goldman. Thank you as always for watching and listening to Cottage Talk, part of the talkSPORT Fan Network.